Hello, my name is Ross McWilliam, and I'm going to deliver a lecture that's part where you see me here and part with a few slides. And I'll also have a little competition quiz at the end for you as well. Now, just a bit about me before we start. I'm an old man, as you can see. I've been speaking and talking, whether it's in teaching, in formal education, or whether it's as a freelance speaker, trainer, and author for the last 10 years. But I've probably done this for about 30 years. I'm actually 60. And as I said, I write books and I talk at conferences. I want to share some today about resilience. This is quite a common word anyway, but given COVID, it's more common and people talk about it more often. And what I want to say is that this presentation is about the caveat to resilience, some of the bad things about resilience. So I'm not going to show you how to build it, but I'm going to show you things to be aware of that would help you build it personally and organizationally. So let's just slot with a slide. So that's a bit about me. You can see me in the top right here, hopefully. We call it the resilience caveat. And I come from a company called Mindset Pro, and I work with young people and senior executives trying to improve performance, whatever that is. Okay, so let's just keep on this track. We have resilience and the caveat. What is resilience? Very quickly, you're probably familiar with all these statements: keeping going, don't give up, adaptability, learn and reinvent better. That's a nice one. And bounce back ability. And it's always seen, whoever you talk to, about being a good thing. Now, if you want to broaden that definition out into one of the gurus, I've got one of his books here, actually. Rick Hansen, he talks about resilience being a world knowledge font of it, really, in terms of 12 factors. And if you look on here, it's not just about bouncing back, he's being very specific about mindfulness, compassion, adaptability, cooperation, self-esteem's in there, how much we have our self-worth, how much grit and motivation, courage and generosity. You wouldn't expect that to be resilient, would you? So we broaden it out a bit to see that resilience is lots of things. This is why if you put resilience into a search engine, you probably come back with about 30 million returns, 30 million returns, just less than confidence. So there are lots of measures for it, lots of people talking about it, lots of people talking about it now. But I'm maybe one of the few people talking about it in terms of it can do us harm, sometimes more harm than good. It's often linked with another phrase called mental toughness. And I was on a session with these guys last week. It's called Doug Strickjajic. I hope that's the pronunciation that's correct, but I call him Doug. And he talks about mental toughness being a different psychological component, defined differently, but as its seat in self-confidence, competency, and awareness. And that's sort of backed up by Jonathan Thader talking about it's a bit broader, mental toughness, than resilience, visualization, self-talk, arousal, and confidence again. So when people talk about resilience, they sometimes interchangeably talk about mental toughness. That's fine. We'll accept that today. And let's move these things on. Now, if you're going to measure resilience, there's so many, as I said, measures out there. The one I use quite a bit is Angela Duckworth. She talks about grit, and I use that as a 12-point scale. It's a quick and easy one to do, and a maximum of 5. The other ones are free ones, Kübler-Ross and Connor Davidson. They come up quite regularly, so I think that they're pretty valid and robust. So we can measure it that way. Now, when you talk to people about resilience, most people think about some heroic physical feat, and that's fine. We'll find out very shortly it's more than that. But Joe Simpson here, he was on a climbing incident where he was hanging off a rope, and his partner above him on the cliff had to cut the rope. It was going to go to his certain death. He spent 3 days surviving in a hot desert during the day and freezing temperatures at night, but he survived. And he made a film out of it, Touching the Void. And he showed great resilience. And they said to him, what resilience do you have? How did it manifest itself? And he said, I just took small goals, one step at a time. And I think that's fascinating. We tend to want a fix straight away, a panacea fix. We want a strategy. And Joe Simpson was saying, yeah, I've been built up to this, my experience, my expertise, but I broke it down to smaller bits. You got people like George Foreman, again, a fizzle example of this. But then, when he hit hard times and lost his title and lost his health in a certain way, he reinvented himself, showing great resilience, that adaptability, creating the George Foreman grill, which made him quite a bit of money. Then you've got other people. Nelson Mandela showed great resilience and determination, probably mindfulness and gratitude when he was in prison for 27 years for a crime he didn't commit, and then came out and changed the world. Malala was persecuted for her want to be educated. And Michael Caine, he's been resilient over 85 years in the acting profession. Different sorts of resilience. But here we come on to the crux of it, really. The caveat, the emotional, psychological, and mental demands. If we're pushing ourselves all the time, almost exclusively to get this one goal, at the same time, we might be lessening our effectiveness in other areas and even compromising our mental health. So let's just think about COVID today. Let's just think about how we're in this sort of U-shape here. And this is a graph called the Kübler-Ross change curve. And this was created in the 1960s to explain grief and bereavement. And if somebody died, we might go through a period of shock and denial, followed by frustration and depression. And we might stay there for a significant or insignificant period of time. It's an individual thing. At some point, many people then come out of this depression and experiment with the new norm of not being with that loved one. What can they take from the experience? They make a decision to integrate new things in their lives, and they move on. Now, very clearly, you could probably see that this shape and these words relate very clearly to COVID at the moment. People at different points on the curve, people experiencing different things. And I think that's fascinating. If we're talking about building resilience now, when we don't know whereabouts on the curve people are, it's an interesting concept, and it can affect people individually and organizationally. So people as an organization, they might want to move on and develop resilience and do the training, but they don't realize that other people at different points in their progression development with the framework of COVID. So that's something to be aware of that could be counterproductive to creating resilience at this particular moment. Now, I like using the inverted U. And if we want, this was developed, stress, the actual phrase was coined by Hans Selye in the 1950s, and he coined it as a good thing. Stress is good. We need to get out of bed. We need to perform, to sing, to speak, to act, to get a job, keep a job, relationships. It's great. But the problem comes when we either have real or perceived stress that's too much frequency, duration, intensity. If we're juggling this for too long, we can go over the hill and end up having overstressed, burnout, collapse, and in some extreme cases, compromised health and even death. On the other side of this inverted U is where we don't get enough stress and we get a bit apathetic to the world, or it could happen if we're in retirement and we don't have a job and we don't have identity and belonging. We can get rusty, the rust outside of things. So, developing resilience is great, but if we are creating so much stress to be so much stronger and adaptable by resilience, we can win by doing that, but lose by overstressing and burnout or understressing and rust out. So it's a fine balance, and it takes time in the framework of COVID, in the context of inverted U in stress and the stress curve, how we develop resilience. Let's push this on a bit. Let's talk about some mental health figures. So if I'm going to an organization and I'm developing resilience, I know from this table here that women are diagnosed in more psychiatric conditions than men. General anxiety, depression, phobias, obsessive compulsive, post-traumatic stress disorder, more women are diagnosed. So statistically, they're the more prevalent. So when I'm doing anything with resilience, I've got to use this to think about how I'm going to get this information across at the right time, the right place, the right amount of information. Maybe it's because women go to doctors more, talk more, and disclose more. Maybe men don't. And that's why on the other side of that diagram here, there's more alcohol and drug dependency, which could really tip them over into very poor mental health conditions. So What I'm trying to say here is that we know that women statistically are more vulnerable to mental health issues. And if we're pushing them to be more resilient within COVID, that could be a factor that could backfire on us. Be careful of the caveat. Statistics, 1 in 4 people suffer from mental health challenges. And in COVID, we're finding now the cohorts, again, of women, of mothers with children under 18 who have been furloughed are the most vulnerable at the moment. Young people who can't see their aspirations being realized can then develop mental health conditions or exacerbate existing ones. There's a whole range of statistics this moment in time that are impacting on this. The groups like the LGBT, BAME and disability groups have statistically a higher degree of mental illness. And if you put that in COVID, where the percentage is even higher, you understand then, if you want to layer something else on top of that, this go-to quality that everybody must have called resilience, really, it can be potentially a recipe for disaster. So how do we respond? Do we not grow resilience and mental toughness? Or do we take on the challenge and use it? So looking at that curve again here, do we then maybe canvass our people in our workplace, maybe ask these questions individually. Can we take advantage? There's an interesting word, take advantage of this situation in COVID now, adapt to the new methods, different working situations, working from home or producing more products for the COVID market, or just for a COVID market for your organization. So there are people now who will thrive within this and they'll develop resilience. But there's an organizational caveat here, because can these super resilient people keep going? And crucially, number 2, what effect will this super resilience have on others? Will it make them less resilient because they can't keep up to that image of somebody else? Will there be these resilient people who have this conscious or subconscious bias that then affects people so they can't measure up to it, or they think less of them? Or the people just perceive they think less of them because they're not the same as them. And you can see that this bias, whichever way it is, can really have a demotivating, de-resiliating effect on the organization. And it's interesting as well, when you talk about leaders, there are some stats coming out. And in my conversations last week with the gurus, Clough and Doug, as I want to call them, on mental toughness, they were saying there's more and more feedback that leaders are feeling that the mantle of resilience is weighing too heavily because they're working from home. They don't have the control and influence and identity and belonging at workplace. So they feel less valued, more marginalized, and they're having to admit that they are not resilient as they once thought. And that can be counterproductive when they're supposed to lead that message about being resilient. So we're seeing that now at the moment, and we're seeing more leaders being affected by this. And ultimately, over the next few months and even years, this could transpire into the fact we might have to reskill and re-uptrain them on what is resilience, how to gain it, and maybe more and crucially, how do we lose it? And talking about organizational change and being resilient and sucking it up and all those things we talked about, here's a fantastic quote from Miriam Alexander, an NHS consultant, liaison psychiatrist. This was in The Guardian last week. I relate to this because in my training as a mental health first aider for adults and youth, I talk about this with different organizations, with IBM, with Siemens, and recently with the NHS in Cheshire. So I'm just going to read it out to you. It's vital we create a work culture that encourages self-awareness rather than self-criticism. There may well be individuals who are more susceptible to burnout, but they are not the weaker ones. They're the canaries in the coal mine telling us something is wrong with the system. The lesson is to improve the NHS to make it healthier for all of us. So when people say about the weakest link, I don't like the word weakest. But the links in a chain must be equally strong. And if they're not, then you can have a breakage and more breakage after the first breakage. So we really want to raise this awareness that the ones who, in Miriam's own words, are weaker, the ones who are more challenged, work with them and make them an integral part of the change rather than as a pariah, rather as an outcast, rather as a weakling. And you can see already this organizational culture has a big impact on the development of resilience on an individual level, on their culture and attitude towards resilience, or in this case, not having perceived resilience. So, you know, what she's really saying, we must be more aware of our own feelings, emotions, and behaviors, but also on the other side of that coin, tune in to what other people are thinking or feeling or behaving. Maybe just listen to them. Maybe just support them in any ways that you can, but don't try to judge them. Don't try to put your values onto them. And really, if we can be aware of ourselves, aware of others' needs, don't have this stereotype of resilience at all costs, then this individual and collective resilience caveat, you know, it won't be as much impact on it. Some interesting real points here. Now, the guy I mentioned at the start, Rick Hansen, you know, this guy with the book here, he talks about resilience, how to use it in COVID. Now, I find this fascinating. You know, we're facing a threat, but the difficulty at the moment is this threat of COVID is constantly changing. So that makes it harder to actually deal with it and adapt to it and bounce back from it, because it's changed its nature, its variance, its severity, its intensity, its duration. So he recognizes that awareness I talked about before. So we need to engage in practices that keep us in the moment, clearer, stronger, calmer, using that vagus nerve like breathing, a 3-6-5, 3 in for 3, hold for 6, out for 5. You know, they say we spend 6 months of our lives at traffic lights. So maybe if it's the traffic lights in your car and breathing exercises, you're using that time productively. We talk about, and again, this session is not about building resilience in practices, but in terms of little tips here, there's one here where we have the NLP anchoring. So we breathe in, breathe out and squeeze. And imagine a thermometer coming down, of maybe in our brains, the cortisol and adrenaline coming down that helps us think more with our rational brain rather than the limbic system, which is full of emotions. So we breathe in, squeeze and breathe out. We feel grounded. We think about a thermometer. We could think about the time when we're really good in life, that anchoring moment. Or we can think about the chemicals just reducing down. Lots of different tips like that. You can, resilience, you know, it doesn't have to be something new. We could cue into our past resilience, our retro resilience. When have you shown those fighter, survivor, compassion, adaptability, cooperation, gratitude, self-esteem qualities? When you show those qualities, that shows you've got resilience. Thinking of yourself, thinking of other people. So we've all got it. And sometimes we don't need something new. It's just the retro side we've already got. One of the biggest things to develop resilience and to sustain it, there's the key word, sustain it, is being cared by others, to go to somebody and be vulnerable with. Generally, that can be our primary giving caregivers, our parents, but close friends, partners, who we can talk to and not feel judged. This helps us consolidate our resilience outlook. Okay, we're doing the good things, we're getting confirmation from others, everything's okay. And that process of being cared by somebody else helps us put that resilience ball down for a second. If we're constantly carrying that resilience ball, we will fall foul and we'll have to drop it and maybe lose it at some point, and we might lose it for a long, long time. So resilience, we've got to put down from time to time. Now, I was watching a program on TV. It was Simon Reeves in the Americas, and he was talking in a sad conversation with an Inuit tribes leader whose daughter had gone missing for 2 weeks. And as you'd expect, his father was fraught with worry. And Simon listened to this, and then he said, I can see you're resilient, but sometimes we just have to take a break and put that resilience ball down, catch ourselves, and then pick it up again to keep us being resilient, to keep us on our goal, to keep us finding your daughter. And it really resonated with me that, you know, resilience is good. Too much, too often, in your face, and we will break. That is the caveat of resilience. This guy is the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos. He runs Amazon. And talking about resilience and being strong and looking after our well-being, which I've mentioned today, it's not like there's a work-life balance. He doesn't like that phrase, that metaphor, because it suggests that one improves but the other doesn't improve. One takes away from the other. So you might be good at work, but your life suffers, or your life at home's so good and you do work to fill the gaps. A better phrase, he said, is work-life harmony. Symbiotically, one fuels the other. There's a saying with resilience, and as I'll use, is resilience and mental health and well-being. If you push out and be resilient all the time, either for yourself or collectively in an organization, you're going to impact on your own mental health at some point. It's only a matter of time before that ball drops. And you'll certainly impact on the organizational well-being. Whether you mean that or not, consciously or subconsciously, the resilience of other people and the mental health of other people will suffer. Okay, so that work-life harmony, to use and develop resilience, but to put that ball down from time to time. Think of the impact on yourself, hence putting the ball down, but think about the impact organizationally. Are your standards as a paragon too high? It's going to push people away, that they can't measure up. And Jeff Bezos, essentially says, when you come into a room, even the resilient people, the ones who have got the right balance of resilience, they fill the room with energy, not with standards that people can't reach. Just hang on to that for a second. So I'm Ross McWilliam, just 20 minutes or so talking about resilience, the caveat of it, where the negativity lies. And if you want any training in mental health, well-being, accredited from MHFA or any of my courses, then please get in touch. Thank you. I've been Ross McWilliam.